Trosky, thank you. Let's go live to Melbourne now, and joining us is the Labor MP, Peter Khalil. Peter, good to see you. Thanks for your time as always. So with these extra numbers, the explosion of numbers in New South Wales, now you've got extra numbers in Victoria as well. How concerned are you about that spread, and do you believe Victoria is at risk?
Very concerned, Pete, and my heart is with all of our friends in New South Wales. You know, we often have that friendly rivalry between Victorians and New South Wales in sport particularly, but this is like deadly serious and you know, really concerned about what's happening in New South Wales and feel for people in New South Wales. I've spoken to a few people in Sydney now and sort of talked them through how we went through 3 months of lockdown, and hopefully they don't have that much time in lockdown. And there is a concern, as you say, about the spread going into Victoria with some of the cases we've seen across the border. So it's a concerning time.
Do you believe that there should be a national strategy when it comes to dealing with the outbreaks of the Delta variant?
Yes, and yes. And this is a responsibility for the Prime Minister of Australia. You know, he touts a lot the National Cabinet and that.
But the premiers do their own things as well.
They do. Of course, they have certain freedoms to do their own thing. They have certain powers within their jurisdiction. But here's the point. You talked about a national strategy. A national strategy would entail the Prime Minister of this country working with the premiers to come to an agreed-upon strategy to deal with the Delta variant. In fact, it should have happened 15 months ago, frankly. When it comes to the vaccine rollout, when it comes to federal quarantine, it just didn't happen. You know, and we can be political about this, but the point I'm making is one about national responsibility and national leadership, right? There is a real lack of that, and has been a real lack of that. You know, the Prime Minister had one job: get the vaccine rollout right. With 5 months in, we've only had 9% of people in Australia fully vaccinated. Have a look at the US, have a look at the UK. Look at the pictures of Wimbledon. You know, people there, full crowds at Wimbledon.
Yeah. I mean, they're still getting tens of thousands of cases, though, every day.
Yeah, but the point is they at least got their vaccine rollout done really well, even though they stuffed up the first part of it, and Australia was a lot better in the first part. So there needs to be a national strategy. There needs to be national leadership. And, you know, the Prime Minister has been in hiding effectively.
Okay. You mentioned Melbourne before too. There is some concerns about suburbs, particularly in the west of Sydney, where English isn't a primary language. What do you think are some lessons that can be learned, and something that perhaps that you drew upon in your experience in getting those communities to understand and adopt measures and obey the restrictions, basically? Yeah.
No, that's a really good question that you asked, Peter, because down here in Victoria, we had a bit of a problem, obviously, with translations and various information that was put to various communities, particularly new and emerging migrant groups who had, you know, language issues, if you like, around the information. For most people, even in English, it's quite complicated, some of this stuff. So getting those translations right was critically important. And at the time, I was critical of the federal government because I think there were some reports they used Google Translate. It was all over the place. The state government stepped in with some translations as well. That needs to be got right, because what you don't want is vulnerable communities having COVID-19 rip through them. And that tends to happen. We've seen from the data around the world, it tends to be those lower socioeconomic and migrant areas where COVID-19 has done the most damage, partly because of this informational gap, if you like, around the communication. And so that needs to be got on top of. We've got lessons learnt. We've gone through this in Victoria. I would hope that Gladys Berejiklian is talking to the Dan Andrews and that the Prime Minister and the National Cabinet are working on a plan. Goes back to your point, a national strategy, a plan, has all the elements in place, a strategy around the rollout, coordination between state and federal, around federal quarantine, about resources, about communication plans and advertising and information, about logistics. Where is that?
Yeah. Hey, just on to Kevin Rudd. He's been on radio this morning, Pete, and he claims that he messaged Scott Morrison to tell him that he was going to talk to the boss of Pfizer, but Morrison didn't respond for some time until after that text message. Do you believe it is wrong that the Prime Minister didn't phone the global boss of Pfizer when he made so many calls in support of Matthias Cormann? He says that he spoke
believe
to
it
the
was-
Australian head.
Yeah, look, I believe it was wrong, messed up, lacking leadership, that the Prime Minister couldn't do the job he was supposed to do. I would have pulled out every stop, talked to the executive chairman globally, the Australian, any executive that's necessary. The reports that we heard were that some junior bureaucrats from the health department, the Commonwealth Health Department, flipped off Pfizer executives in June or July last year when there was a discussion. And that really set the negotiations on the wrong track, and there had to be kind of a clean-up. And when suddenly Morrison and Hunt realised they put all their eggs in the AstraZeneca basket, they scrambled to go back to Pfizer after having flipped them off early in the year, if those reports are true. So, yes, he should have called the executive chairman globally. You know, Benjamin Netanyahu did. All these other world leaders did what they were supposed to do to secure vaccines. Here's the other point. The best practice was to secure 6 or 7 vaccines. I said this 6-8 months ago. I wasn't Nostradamus in saying it. There were others who were saying it. We put all our eggs in one basket, as it were, or two. The University of Queensland one fell over at trial stage. You should have had 6 or 7. You should have had contingency. And here's the thing, Peter. If things all went well and they all worked, for example, you would have had surplus. We could have been helping our Pacific neighbours in a way that was really meaningful. But the Morrison government didn't do that. In fact, they, pissed off the Pfizer people early on and then scrambled to try and make up for it later. So, Kevin Rudd's always here to help. Great. If he made a call, good on him. He's doing it in his personal capacity as an Australian who's concerned. This should have been done by the government right from the beginning.
Okay, just finally, reports this morning that Labor will be keeping the stage 3 tax cuts if you win the next election. Can you confirm that?
No, I can't, because the decision hasn't been made, Peter, and
So
we haven't
the report's
actually made
wrong.
our decision. It hasn't been brought to caucus. We've always said that those decisions will be made before the next election. I think that hasn't changed. And I think this is another bit of cheeky reporting here for Morrison to take attention off, although thankfully we talked about about the vaccine rollout and federal quarantine and so on, but to take attention off from the lack of leadership on that stuff. Look, we'll make a decision on this that is based on what is best for the budget, what is best for the Australian people, what is best for the nation, hopefully post-COVID in that economic recovery period. But it hasn't come to our caucus. An official decision hasn't been made yet.
Okay, an official decision hasn't been made despite that report this morning. Peter Khalil, good to chat. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, mate.
Coming up, crisis